all the day long, whether rain or shine. She's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie, the Riveter. Thank you. It was fall, 1993. I sat in my classroom, exhausted after a day of teaching language arts. I looked at the stack of essays I should be grading and decided I didn't want to. About that time, the door swung open, and there stood Clark Johnson, one of my colleagues from the history department. Clark taught American history. He worked with the Troup County Archives, and he also was a very viable part of the Troup County Historical Society in LaGrange, where I'm from. Clark stepped into my room and he pointed at me with his finger. And just like Uncle Sam, he said, "We need you." I said, "Who is we, and what do you think you need me for?" Thinking he probably was there to sign me up for some faculty committee. I was ready to say no. But Clark smiled at me. He said, "Carol, the Archives is planning a year-long series of programs that will begin in the fall of 1994 and move into the spring of 1994 and move into the spring of 95 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. We're looking for people to do programs, and we thought about you." I said, "Why?" "I'm a language arts teacher, an English teacher. I teach theater. What do I know about history?" Now, I loved history, don't get me wrong, and I had watched every single World War II movie that had ever come on television with my daddy. But I didn't have enough knowledge to be a speaker for an event. So I said, "Clark, well, what are you thinking? Why are you asking me this?" He said, "Well, you're a storyteller." "Yeah." "You're an actress." "Yeah." "You've got brown hair." "Yeah." He said, "We were thinking you would make the perfect Rosie the Riveter." And I said, "Who?" Now, let me tell you, I really wasn't quite that ignorant. I did know some history, and I did know about the women on the home front during World War II. But in 1993, this image was not everywhere like it is now. Trust me, it's everywhere. I have everything from a cheese board to a night light with Rosie the Riveter on it. I've got magnets and hats and action figures and shirts with Rosie the Riveter on them now. But in 1993, this story was not being told. The women who had been real riveters, those women who had gone to work during World War II, thought they were just doing what they needed to do. And they didn't know their stories were special. So I looked at Clark. I said, "Clark, I don't know if I have time to do this or not." He said, "Carol, let me help you with the research." He said, "This is what we're going to do. I'm going to go to the library, pull in some books that have the Rosie story in them, and I'll help you with the research if you'll do the presentation." I said, "Well, maybe." So the next day he came to my classroom with a stack of books checked out from our library, and there he'd put sticky notes and all the stories he wanted me to read. I opened it up, I read the first story, and I was like, wow, I should know about this. And I read more, and I read more, and I read more, and I discovered that Rosie is actually just an icon. There's not one Rosie the Riveter. There were 6 million women who left their jobs as nurses and cooks and housekeepers and maids and teachers to go build ships and planes and tanks, to build ammunition, to drive trucks and buses and locomotives, all for our country during World War II. I thought, if I'm a grown woman and I don't know this story that well, there are probably other people who don't, and they should. So I went down the halls of Troop High School. I opened Clark's door and I said, I can do it. He said, good. You're going to be a program in March of '94. You got a few months to get ready. No, in my world, that meant I had a few months to procrastinate. And I did. But in the last few days, I scurried around, I learned the song, I went to our drama closet and found at that time a 1980s woman's jumpsuit. It happened to be blue and it had big shoulder pads in it. I found an old paisley scarf at my house, I gathered some props, and I headed to the archives ready to tell the story of Rosie the Riveter. As soon as I came into the archives, a lady tapped me on the back and said, why are you here dressed like that? I said, oh, I'm part of the program today. I'm going to be telling the story of Rosie the Riveter and women on the home front. And she said, everybody wants to talk about her. You ought to be talking about the women who were in the service, the women who were wax and waves and spars and the ferry pilots. You ought to be telling about those women. I threw up my hands in surrender. I said, I know their story, but that's not what I was asked to do. Today I was asked to be Rosie the Riveter. And I fretted a little bit about it. I watched her take her seat, and eventually I came to the stage to do my thing. People laughed. They clapped at all the right places, and I thought, well, I guess that was successful. But I wasn't sure until I talked to Clark. And when the program was over, I headed straight to him and I said, Clark, did I do what you wanted me to do? And he said, absolutely. Everybody loved it. And I said, not that lady over there. And I pointed to her and he said, I know, that's my mother. The thing I should know about his mother, she was a wave. She'd been in the Naval Reserve. And that was important to her. When the event was over, I headed home. I took off the jumpsuit. I took it back to school. I put the notes in the file folder and stuck it in a file cabinet. And I, put the props back where they belonged around the house. I thought I was done. But I was happy I'd done my part to honor the veterans and to tell the story of those women. But in a small town like LaGrange, smallish town like LaGrange, your picture gets in the paper for just about everything. And my picture made the paper dressed as Rosie. And so the phone started ringing. Right off the bat, I got a call from Mary, one of the interpretive rangers at the Little White House in Warm Springs. Do you guys know about the Little White House? It's where FDR would go to bathe in the warm springs. It's where he was when he died. And Mary invited me. She said, Carol, come to the Little White House and tell your story, because we hear you do a program about Rosie the Riveter. I said, I do now. She said, will you come and tell it to our guest on the Saturday closest to D-Day? And I said, yes, I'd be happy to. So I showed up that week. I did the program. I told about Rosie to anybody who paused long enough to listen. And then I moved back to the Little White House the second year because they enticed me. They brought a real Rosie to join me, a lady who was as short as I was and thin all over, so tiny, her job was to climb into the nose of damaged aircraft. And there she made the repairs. She made $1,100 a year. But she fell in love with her boss who made $2,200. So she quit her job and married him. The next year, I came back to the Little White House and they had invited women from all over the Southeast. Women who told about their jobs as riveters and welders and crane operators. It was exciting and I could feel myself soaking up their energy and soaking up their stories. In this group, I met Dr. Fran Carter, an educator from Birmingham who as a young woman had gone to work riveting airplanes in Birmingham. She was so proud of her practice project, which was an ashtray she'd riveted together. But when her boyfriend Joe came home on leave, he picked up her ashtray and seeing how rickety it was, said, "Thank God I'm a paratrooper and I'm getting out of planes as fast as I can." Then I met Liz and Ray, a wonderful couple. Liz proudly displayed the 2 production E-pins she'd received for excellence at Doak's Aircraft, while she worked as Ray was in the Army. Ray gave me my first Rosie the Riveter poster. He gave me a commemorative badge for the end of the war, and then he gave me a little bottle of sand from Iwo Jima. And in my hand, he placed the card that told his story. And that's when I realized the value there was in telling these stories that were not being told and not being shared. You see me now, 29 years later. I've had the wonderful opportunity to now work with that group of women in an official capacity. You see, after they had come together at the little White House, they realized their story should be told, and not just by me. They formed the American Rosie the Riveter Association on December 7th, 1998. They have chapters all across the nation, and now I'm the student grant chairperson. They said, "You can join our organization, but not because you tell our story. You need to do your family research and see if you've got a Rosie in the house." Well, I was able to join, not because my grandfather actually worked as a riveter at a company called Bell Aircraft, which you know as Lockheed in Marietta. Instead, I was able to join as a rosebud because my grandmother rolled bandages every Wednesday with the women in her church. So I'm a proud rosebud. Time has taken its toll. In these 29 years, I have worn out 3 other pair of work boots. I've let these coveralls out and in several times. I now go to the gym to work on my muscles. But I'm still doing this work because it's still important. There are people that need to know that these women kicked down a very big door for my generation and my daughter and my granddaughter's generations. So it does me honor to do their work, to tell their stories. And I'm proud to tell you they're telling them too. There are now 6 volumes of Rosie the Riveter stories produced by the American Rosie the Riveter Association. I've had the joy of meeting these women and hearing their stories, of meeting, for example, sisters who worked side by side at Willow Run riveting. The lady who became the city clerk. She'd been the secretary to the city clerk, but when he got called up to service, she was the only one that knew what he did, and she got his job. I met a young woman who, as a young lady, was a student of chemistry studying at Columbia University, and she got asked to work on some research that became the Manhattan Project. I also met a lady who served as the assistant decaler to the woman who put decals on the Enola Gay. Where would I be if I had said no 29 years ago? What stories would I have missed? My family tells you I don't know how to say no. If it sounds fun, I'm always in, like today. But I could have said no. I'm really glad that I didn't. I'm glad that I walked down to Clark's room that day and said, I can do it. And I still am. Thank you.